So we want to transition to our first panel discussion and invite our panelists to come on up and get organized and situated while I set the stage a bit. 2 years ago, a new statewide network of arts leaders formed a new coalition to help ensure student access to arts and education in Indiana. The focus was on implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act in the state, and from that, the Indiana Arts Education Network emerged as a powerful voice to unify arts leaders and educators and engage state and local policymakers. Here with us today to talk about their experiences, their challenges, and their lessons learned from the process here in Indiana are Mark Goff, the CEO of Paige's Music, Matt Carter, Vice President of Destination Development for Visit Indy and Executive Director at Music Crossroads, Eric Martin, who is the President of Music for All, a national organization that supports student performances and educator, teacher, and professional development. And our good friend is the moderator, Mary Luehrsen from the NAM Foundation. Please join me in welcoming them, and I'm going to pass the conversation off to Mary to get it kicked off.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everybody. So I want to thank Jeremy, ECS, Jane Best, who I think is extremely cool. Would you agree with me? Right? And I've learned so much from Jane, and so much value the participation with Arts Education Partnership. And I want to thank all of you, and I want to congratulate you. I say, what, for getting here and having lunch? But for taking the time and investing in what I call this precious partnership. The Arts Education Partnership, there are a few of us in the room that remember the progression of the partnership and the changes within the partnership and the commitment of the partnership way back in the Clinton administration. And I think that many of us have held onto it as one of the anchors in our professional lives or in our personal lives as we've moved this agenda forward. So the fact that you are all here gathered to develop yourselves and develop your concept of what matters now, what matters for your organization, to strengthen yourself and to commit to really what is a precious network. So thank you for that. What we just saw here is really what we want. And we want this for every child and in every discipline, that they move through their early childhoods and their formative years and their developing years as they make choices for themselves, that they have this as a bedrock. And that's, again, why we are all here and what we want to do. The NAM organization, which is 118 years old, which is old, came together around very early in the 20th century, the goals that every person would have a very music-filled life. And that has evolved and changed as we know more, but it's always been central to our belief as an organization. And along the way, about 15, 17 years ago, we created the Support Music Coalition, which was our next step into the formal land of creating champions for music education. And in our early days, we did everything via a monthly conference call. Does anyone remember those? I think Heather does. We would come together because we said, how are we going to, I think those on the panel remember, how are we going to unite a message that we all would grow to get what we want, to get this of what we want. And in the early days, we had one of Hollywood and Broadway royalties come onto the conference call. Carol Channing came onto the conference call. And Carol Channing said at the time, at the end of the call, she said, and she heard all of us talking about what we wanted and what we were doing, and she said, what if I didn't have the opportunity to learn and express what I can do? What if I didn't have, and she said it, with almost on the verge of tears, because I think she realized what we were working for, what we were caring about, and the networks that we were building. And she goes, we just have to do this. So I always carry Carol on my shoulder a little bit, saying, this is the work that we have to do. But now to the big question for the panel, and why we're here today and why Jane asked us to be here. What do we do? What do we do to get more children involved, to engage and move the various forces that might be inhibiting the equity and access and learning opportunities that we really want? What do we do? You know, this is a time when we talk a lot about collective impact. And that, again, kind of can get lost in the word cloud. What does that really mean? And I ask you, as we go through this panel and our panelists from various perspectives, to ask yourself, what is your role and your organization's role in the collective impact as we want to move this forward, that every child has this opportunity? And it can be from the place of saying we need to continue to do more and better of what we do. We need to grow our partnerships. We need to place some of our influence in places where people who have the ability to do more will actually be doing more to get us where we want to go. So I invite you to have that sort of internal process. Again, as I was watching these beautiful children, I would just love to be, while mom is making dinner at home, said, well, what did you learn in school today? And that was the demonstration in the kitchen, or the dining room, or the hallway to the bedroom, because it's just so alive in them. So I welcome our wonderful friends, my wonderful friends that I've learned so much from. First of all, let's just go down the line. Tell us a little bit about your organization. Remember, the role is pithy, because we want to move down to the content. So quick update about your organizations, your companies, what you do here in Indiana.
Well, I am Eric Martin at Music for All. Many people know us as Bands of America. We started off our experience in 1975 producing events for high school marching bands, really to transform them and to help teachers become better teachers and students be better learners. But we transitioned over the decades into Music for All, whose mission is to create, provide, and expand positively life-changing experiences through Music for All. And we have as a vision to be a catalyst to ensure that every child across America has access and opportunity to engage in active music making in his or her scholastic environment. A lot of words, but each one of them having a particular meaning. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about NAMM and what it has done, the Country Music Association, what it's done, but we're really proud to be part of a community that had a vision, which I would call part of its economic vision, that really included us. So the city of Indianapolis, Matt Carter, and that leadership team that brought us to this community gave us the room to move from being a high-performing event production company to one who's engaged at its core in terms of advocacy. And in our particular case, we focus on advocacy and action. It's the doing and not so much the research.
And if you've never experienced a Bands of America event, which occur regionally, and also the Grand Nationals are here in Indiana, I urge you to go online and look at some of the YouTubes, because you want to see arts integration. I mean, here we have these remarkable music performing groups on the field, marching frontwards and backwards and playing beautifully. You have storytelling, you have dance, you have drama, you have student-created stories that are enacted, you have costuming, and it's and also then what happens in a community when this goes on year after year after year. So it's very powerful. Mark, tell us about.
So I'm Mark Goff. I'm the owner of Paige's Music, a school music retailer here in Indiana. We serve school band and orchestra programs all around the state of Indiana. We are one of the oldest retail music stores in the country. We were founded in 1871. And as my role as owner of the company, of course, we oversee providing band and orchestra instruments to kids all over the state. I've also been involved with NAMM. I'm a former chairman of NAMM, so I've worked very closely with Mary over the years. And during that chairmanship, learned a lot about advocacy. And so as I learned that, I brought that home to my own community, my organization, my state, and have been actively involved for the past about 5 years in developing the Indiana Arts Education Network, which I know we're going to spend a little more time talking about.
Right. And Matt?
Is pithy 5 letters or 20?
Well, you choose, but I'll have hand signals.
Matt Carter with Visit
For you,
Indy.
it's 5.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm with Visit Indy. I'm the strange bedfellow in this on this stage that may not make sense, but I hope in the end does. And I will tell you that in terms of who we are, obviously our role is to make Indianapolis a must-see destination. It's also, we do tourism for quality of life and quality of place. And if you know anything about the history of our city, there was a group of people that early on were lieutenants, were trying to determine what does a city look like. And it was back in the day when middle-aged white guys would get in a room with smoke and they'd come out and say, this is what we're going to do. That's just the way it was. But those 5 strategies included a number of things, including the arts. But the one that we became known for was sports, the amateur sports capital of the world. Now, in my role with Visit Indy, I was our chief financial officer, and I will say that the precursor to my career was I've had the distinct pleasure of my entree into city building was a phone call from then Mayor Dick Lugar, who had called a high school kid, a junior, who directed a pep band in a high school, asking if we would come and play for his launch of his senatorial campaign. And the influence of that was, at that time, a culmination of growing up as a child, one of 4 boys that sang every Sunday, either at my grandparents' in a small town of Sharpsville or in a small town of Tipton, that the end of our conversation was around a piano singing 4-part harmony, because it's what we did in church and it's what we did on Sunday evenings as we gathered and before we said goodbye. Now, I took that music for granted because I thought it was something that everybody did. Little did I know those seeds were planted in such a way that I would get a phone call that has now led me to work with all 6 mayors that have led this city for the last 4 decades, and a relationship with them where you have an opportunity to make a difference. And that was the great opportunity that I was given. In the part of that, and this is why I said pithy's 20 words, or 20 letters, was a realization that what I received was not necessarily something that everyone else was getting, and that there was a role that I was playing in my own children's lives, and we had quadruplet daughters, so we compounded the issue by taking music for granted.
8-part harmony. No.
But we didn't sing around the piano. I forgot that was something that my parents instilled within me, and I no longer necessarily could rely upon the arts administrators, and I would say the arts teachers in the classroom that energized me to want to go to school. So roll forward, Visit Indy created a strategy called Music Crossroads, which was a recognition that we could not be a sustainable, healthy community if all we were was one part and not the other. And so we created Music Crossroads as an opportunity, quite frankly, to stack the deck in our favor, to invest in young amateur arts makers in a way that brought them to our city before they recognized that they were going to have a career, and we hoped that the seed we planted in them at an early phase would pay dividends long term. That was the intent. Now there's another story on the backside that we'll talk about.
Yeah, but that's good, Matt, and you kept it for under 20 minutes too. Is very good. But I want to do some modeling here, because I am an old school teacher, right? So here you have, and you see where are you in the formula here? You have a nonprofit organization. It could be national, it could be regional, it could be hyper-local. You have a business person who grew and developed a business, now has a statewide service, but is very much involved in the economic life and success of the state. And you have someone that is tied to municipal government. So in other words, look at now, invite you to model for yourself. What are your tentacles and what is your network like? Now, from each of your perspectives, I've just outlined them again. But I have a caveat that I didn't put in the notes. So
I know.
What do you see as the primary obstacle, either or maybe it's an S, obstacles to getting that equity and access that we're all working for? And we're all going to assume it's money. If you talk about, I'm sorry if that's all you had to say, it's money, then you don't talk. But we all know, because that's just an excuse. It's really not the money. You know, let's just put that out there. It's a calculation. But going beyond that, we got that off the table. What are the obstacles to getting where we want? All of you have been involved in this being champions, which is really the words that we like to use for this. Who would like to start that? Mark?
Sure.
You're nodding vigorously.
Well, it's all of the above, but I think everything rises and falls with leadership, right? So champions cannot be overstated, the importance of that, having champions that are making sure that the reality of the benefit of arts education is being told over and over and over again. When you realize the value of it, you find a way to get it done, right? That's it. It's champions.
So it's either having champions in place, which means I guess we get to elect some of them, right? Or identifying them, that they don't know that it's important that they're a champion, right? So then it becomes that.
Because the leaders, pardon me, the leaders get to choose what the priorities of the organization are, right? And so if you have leaders that understand the importance of arts education, they will find a way to get it done.
And then you can have a conversation, right?
The challenge is to demonstrate that you're a worthy priority. And it isn't money, but it is governmental and civic priorities. We're in Indianapolis because that Indianapolis found that there's reason for social and economic value to have here. Last time I went to a Hill visit, I did find that it made a difference for me not to talk about what every human being in this country realizes, that music and arts education matters. I've not found a leader who hasn't supported it. But at the same time, it becomes that against what they perceive to be the other priorities. And I didn't get attention on the Hill until I said, well, you know that we bring more than $40 million of economic impact to Indiana every year. And legislative aides start to take notes. So it's a matter of the priorities, and what we have to do is we have to take it into our own hands to make sure that the arts are visible, that they are serving, that they're always saying yes to when there is a political campaign launched, to when there's a civic event, that it is not just about the child's experience, but it's about helping our communities to understand the indispensable value that arts have to our culture and our community. You can't live, die, be married, or do anything without music. And that we just have to be in front of people. In our organization, it's our focus for advocacy is, forgive me for my it's not vulgar, butts and seats. If you have half the school taking arts and music classes, I don't think you have the challenge of funding or commitment to education, to music and arts education.
At least half.
You know, every child should have opportunity and access, and I won't force them to choose them.
Right.
And quite frankly, you know, as we go through our advocacy roadmap at Music for All, the next phone call, the next stage for us is to call the Indiana Sports Athletic Association, because linking the two, you have twice the votes, more control, more opportunity to affect change. And that while not as myriad as the opportunities, I believe, in arts and music education, sports activity, anything that brings people together civically, we don't teach civics formally in our society anymore. We do in music and arts classrooms, we do on sports teams. That's where you learn civility.
Wonderful points, and Matt, we'll get to you, but I just want to give a shout out again to the research that the Arts Education Partnership provides us. Peer review, vetted. When we funded it, our hands were not on it except at the very end, you know, to basically with our other advisors to look at it. But again, it's really up to us who cares. Maybe do we care most? Well, when we devote our lives to it, we probably do care the most, to be the ones who thread the needle, right? And not to wait, you know, not to complain. We can complain a little bit to our friends, but not to keep going and threading those needles of the reasons. Americans for the Arts brings us profoundly detailed economic impact information that is, again, part of the information that we that we carry forward. Matt, obstacles.
I guess what I look at it from a slightly different perspective. You're the experts in the room and you fully understand and get the importance of the arts and the relevance of the arts, and certainly the excellence that the arts can instill in children and even adults. And I think that if you take a look historically in the trajectory, and I'll use my own example that I said, sang around a piano, was actively involved in the arts, forgot my role in ensuring that our children were involved in that and advocated for that because I was busy advocating for other things. So I think I would go back to, I think that each person has to understand its leadership. I absolutely believe that leadership is critical. It's been used for good, it's been used for evil, always will, and so that's not enough. Influence, clearly there are special interest groups that are more successful and less successful at getting what they want. And so influence is important and attaining a level of influence, but relevance is, and what I would call clout are critically important. That connection to why it matters. The old, if you don't understand your why, everything else is irrelevant. And so I think that one of the challenges is that the arts so gets it that it forgets sometimes to connect its why to what the world needs. And we've seen in higher ed this period of time where there was an alignment gap between what kind of student they were producing and what growth in corporations needed to employ. And it fell out of whack. And we're beginning to address some of that alignment. And I think really creating the alignment between what the arts brings to every individual and unlocks within them if it's brought at an early enough age, and I would say at any time, but certainly in the educational process, with its capacity to align you with opportunities in the future. And so I really think that if you look at city building and nation building, in the end, it's talent. And what businesses and what governments and what the private sector, public sector are looking for is talent to help them achieve success. And I think that from my perspective, because all of you will do the best that you can do and have done, is that we need to bring the talent sector who is buying talent and help them tell the story of the product that they are employing that has this in them is a better investment than one that doesn't. Now that's easy to say and really hard to do. And Mark could attest to this, that one of the challenges is if you go to the HR director of Fortune 500 companies, they got 1,000 things on their plate and this isn't their priority. Yet if you talk to them, what they systemically say is the challenge in talent is there's not enough and it's not properly equipped for what they need. So somehow I think that the key issue is helping people see the connection between the two. Mm-hmm. And I think that'll take a reflection in how you adapt the way you teach and connect art, and the way that business begins to understand the role it plays. Because I think there's an analogy I use right down the street. The Indiana University Medical School has an orchestra for its residents. And so I'm struck by the fact that if you know anything about residency and doctors is that they don't have any spare time. And so why in the world's day would they play orchestra on their day off? And the more fundamental question is, how they learn to do that and become doctors. To be able to field an orchestra in a medical school, I think is a great testimony. So how do you put a spotlight on some of these unusual, Condoleezza Rice, the fact that when she was traveling the world, she looked for an instrument society for people that she could play with. How do you begin to tell these stories and unlock these stories that remind people of, I need that. I'm not complete without that. And I think that it's a combination of all of that.
I think you use the word alignment, right?
Right.
And again, who's going to create that alignment? I go back to, that's part of our job, right? We have to go out and make the alignment or make these things obvious. And wouldn't you want to rather go to an internist that played a Brahms symphony? I mean, after all, right? I mean, that would, there's a rationale. And there's a lot of orchestras in medical schools all over the country, by the way. Very interesting. So again, put yourself in some of these shoes or the walk that they're challenging us to walk. I go back to some of the economic trends right now, which is all about local. The energy is local. And you ask yourself where you are with your nonprofit, what are the energies that you can maybe bring to the table that would raise this alignment opportunity? And, have you reached out effectively to an elected official? Have you reached out to the creative industries in your community? We find with our 7,000, 9,000 or so NAM members that are in the US only, that we've had to help them build their more formal connections to the nonprofit music service sectors. Not because there isn't goodwill, but that alignment just takes a little bit of effort. It has to be done deliberately. So again, how do we put ourselves into action? Eric, I loved what you said, that almost to a person, people are saying, yes, music and arts education is really important. Every kid has to have it. We need to build communities around it. But how do we do it? And our great support in DC was the firm that Dick Riley, former Secretary of Education, was a part of, and he would always counsel us saying, everybody cares about it, but we have to get them to do something.
And Mary, I sort of shorted the question a little bit too, because right now I personally am worried about the inequities that exist, even that which we do have. I just really become concerned, even Matt, in our own community, that when I look at core urban schools, the challenges are greater. There's the absence of intentionality. That Music for All is an organization that is probably stronger than it's ever been in its history. We're the fourth largest arts organization in the state, yet it was built on the backs of suburbia and wealthier districts who can afford to develop the programs. The commitment is there, the parents are there, the district is there, the community is behind them. As you go to Avon, Indiana, there are street banners that say home of the Avon High School Bands of America Grand Champions 3 times. That matters to them as a community, and it increases real estate values, quite frankly. But what is happening in our core cities is the absence of intentionality. And sometimes it is a confusion about what the governmental priority is. Is the school safe today? Do we have teachers to begin with? But I think that America is at a crossroads, and music and arts education is just one of those shortages or shortcomings that we have in terms of core urban communities. But we have to be intentional about finding solutions and that allow and encourage participation.
And you're doing this here in Indianapolis, right? Yes. Tell us a bit more about the intentionality for your work directly in the city.
Well, first I will give credit again to this community. When they brought us here, they asked us to be intentional and engaged in Indianapolis. And I will tell you, sometimes it can be some of the most frustrating work, because when I talked about our vision, it was to be a catalyst. We don't hold a school board seat. We're not a principal. We're not the teacher in the school. But we do involve, we actually provide all of Indianapolis's instrumental continuing education for their teachers in terms of in-services. We provide those. We have been sending Indianapolis kids to our summer camp free of charge, at least 30 for more than a decade each year. And this year, we came to a level of frustration in terms of the changes, in terms of what way will we operate schools next year that's different from this year, to not necessarily have anything that we can brag about, but it's just change. And so I've come to the conclusion that our latest programming, and it's not scientifically based, it's practically based, is to say that the only thing that we know will exist right now in Indianapolis schools is there will be a teacher and there will be students. So we have launched a program we call the I-65 Corridor Program. Thank you to the Country Music Association Foundation, Yamaha, and other leaders in our communities for helping us. But we are taking some of those suburban profits to actually engage in a program of looking at the teacher and teaching them what suburban programs do anyway, teaching the students to help the teacher, to be teachers themselves. And we've said, okay, we're not going to talk about what the principal, the superintendent, or the school board isn't giving you. What you have is yourself. You, the teacher, you, the students. What is under your control that you can do to strengthen your program? Setting goals, learning how to achieve those goals. And what we're doing at Music for All is facilitating that discussion, helping from the business side in terms of how to do a business plan, how to decide what you can do, to see what the impediments would be, but to actually give, which is an experiential learning that goes well beyond music, to the teacher and the students, because that I have looked at students and started to have the same feeling that an inner city child has first day they see their teacher is, will you be here tomorrow? And that is a challenge that most do not face, and that by building that relationship to where they can have an open discussion about that, and they can envision what they would become together, that's our latest strategy, and we are not strong enough nationwide to do it, so we created a corridor, I-65 corridor. So we were using the urban programs in Gary, Indianapolis, Louisville, Nashville, Huntsville, Birmingham, Montgomery, and Mobile, Alabama, and we brought them all to our summer symposium last summer and said, we're building a community. We're going to change the world together, and here's the challenge. What can you do that is within your control? And we avoided any discussion that said, well, I need the principal to do this, or I need the superintendent to do that. Because at the end of the day, even if you're struggling to have the instruments, you can still make music and have music education if you have teachers that are prepared to teach and students who want to learn. So that's our focus right now.
Bravo, that's wonderful. Mark, we'd love to dive closer to the Indiana Arts Network. So could you speak about your role as a business person in the community, but also what the movement of the development of the network?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. So I've been in the music business for 33 years now, and every year at some point we get a call from a music teacher, band teacher, orchestra teacher that says, help. They're cutting my program. I'm facing a challenge every year. And so this is an evergreen issue, you know, the challenges against band and orchestra programs, music programs, art programs in general. But we've never developed an evergreen solution to it, right? And so a few years ago, Lane Valayo, who's the executive director of IMEA, Indiana Music Educators Association, he and I sat down and we talked about, you know, can we build this organization that will help to meet that challenge? So we started really slow, started brainstorming, and we said, who do we need to get at the table? And so we invited Matt Carter, City of Indianapolis, John Whitman, who is Director of Artist Relations for Yamaha, Mike Campice, Director of Education for Con Selmer.
In Elkhart?
In Elkhart, Indiana, myself, and one other. Initially, we had Rusty Briel, who was the head of Indiana State School Music Association. And we just started gathering monthly to talk about the issues. Along during this time, we connected with Mary, and you know, Mary provided us with great counsel, you know, because we were just struggling. You know, we all have this desire to see arts education be stronger, but how do you achieve that? And so she encouraged us many times, but one time in particular, she encouraged us to go on a listening tour. She said, just take some time, make appointments with people who have influence, and just talk to them about arts education and find out, you know, what is really the challenge. And so we met with elected officials, superintendents, a variety of people. And, you know, I'll echo what we've heard up here. Nobody is against arts education. There's nobody that we went to speak with that said, that arts education,
It's a bad
that's a
thing.
bad thing. Nobody, right? So they all agree that it's an important thing, but they don't, in general, understand what it takes to build a successful, music or arts program. So we took that, and then I'll fast forward. We met for a couple of years, and I'll fast forward to a couple of years ago when ESSA was passed, right? And we found ourselves with this opportunity that was, we had all been working at the federal level to get this law passed, and it got passed, and then all of a sudden, the work is now required to be done at the state level. And we were like, oh no, what do we do now? So at the time, I was on the executive committee for NAM, and so we challenged Joe Lamond and Mary to come up with a solution for state coalition building. And so Mary, in her wisdom, realizes that it's about partnerships and collaborations, put together the partnership between NAM, NAFME, and Americans for the Arts to support the building of these state coalitions. And so we were one of those. Mary and Lynn Tuttle from NAFME and Jeff, who's in the room from Americans for the Arts, they came to our inaugural meeting about 2 years ago. And by the way, so the steering committee, we all just picked up our Rolodexes and just started calling and emailing people. And we reached out to anybody that we knew in arts organizations, community arts organizations, anybody that we knew in business, anybody we knew in education that had leadership roles, and we just said, y'all come, right? We're starting this thing, and just come. And so we started it in, I think it was 2016, and we held our first meeting around the launch of the statewide coalition or the statewide efforts for ESSA. We had about 30 people show up. These are all leaders of organizations, and we started the process of doing the work for ESSA at the state level. And I can get more into that now, or we can cover that later. But I think the bottom line is, again, with so much encouragement from Mary, just start, just start moving. And she infused a couple of things in us that we still hang on today. Number one is that we're relentlessly positive, right? And that both of those words are very, very important, that we're relentless because it matters, and that we're positive because nobody wants to meet with a whiner, right? So we have to be positive and talk about, why is this such an important thing? And the other thing is that we are an organization of action. Nobody wants to go to a meeting just to have a meeting, right? So we put together meetings to teach us, to engage us, to kind of set us in a direction, and then we go off and we do the work. So that's the Indiana Arts Education Network, and we can talk about more about what we've accomplished. But
And since then, you've done a couple fly-ins, and you
Yeah.
lobbied for the language in the state plan.
Right.
Let's fill that gap, I think.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we did the work for ESSA, had some success. The election happened, people changed. We had to go back and redouble the efforts. We ultimately ended up not getting exactly what we wanted in the Indiana plan, but we got some language in the Indiana plan that is positive for arts education. That would not have happened without the Indiana Arts Education Network. Definitely wouldn't have happened. We've also had 2 state drive-ins in the last 2 years, and we're in the process of planning our next statewide event, which will be a drive-in at the Indiana Department of Education.
And something happened this last year, which is pretty cool. Didn't you speak at the?
Oh, at our drive-in, at the we were meeting. We had a resolution by a member of the Indiana House, and so we got up to the House member that sponsored it got up and introduced it, and then they turned the microphone over to me, and it just said tell us what you want to tell us. So I had the whole Indiana house there listening, and
So very unplanned, though.
totally unplanned, which number one gave me my opportunity to give our message. We were working to make appointments to talk with these people one-on-one, and I had the opportunity to just speak to them all in a room. But when I was finished, the Speaker of the House, we had also had a small ensemble from Shelbyville High School that had been playing at a luncheon that we were hosting, and they came in with us, and the Speaker of the House said, "Those kids over there holding those instruments, do they play?" And I said, "Well, you better believe it." And so the band director, they very quickly got their music together, and they played a Dixieland version of Back Home Again in Indiana for the Indiana House.
All spontaneous.
All spontaneous.
It's not on the agenda.
And
right?
so the Indiana House members are on their feet, they're clapping, and they're dancing, and they're laughing, and we had a beautiful moment that was completely unplanned, but was made possible by the fact that we were there, and we were doing the work.
Just
and
feels like so much of it is showing up, right? I mean, we go back to some of our basics in life as adults, right? And it was just, and Matt, you were on that steering committee. Eric, you weren't officially on the steering committee, but very much
members.
part of the conversation as it was coming along. And, it's just like, there's a target, which is the state legislature and the Board of Education, and there was a lot of validation having to take place of that you were really important and they had to hear from you, and you were really important. Matt, you were helping to them understand as a business person you were important, as a national nonprofit in the town. Matt, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think yes and.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate the power. Legislators, when they're in session, are so busy, and they're bombarded by every single lobbyist and every single issue. And yes, you have to do that. And the opportunity to reach them is when they're out of session and when they're home. And that ability to create those relationships when they're not in session is something that is oftentimes forgotten. And when you've got national office, that's a little harder. But when you're in a state and you have local representatives, so I think part of this is, and I also think having uncommon people having those conversations. So I know when I met with Greg Porter, who's a representative in our neighborhood, he asked me, and we were at another event and talked about music. He was like, "Why do you care?" And so what I would also tell you is that the choir singing the benefits of music is expected. The person that is successful somewhere else that's advocating is unexpected. And I've had several different people that I've talked to away from these official events that have said, "Why do you care?" And those testimonies are powerful. And so I think it's yes and. It is, don't underestimate. Leadership is not you're in charge. Leadership is you lead by example and you take opportunities where they exist. And so I think it's really important that you don't underestimate the fact that you can call your state legislator who lives in your neighborhood and invite them over to your backyard for brats on a Sunday, and they might just say yes. And developing the friendship that is beyond the special interest ask has a lot of credibility that shouldn't be lost. I think everyone can play that role, but engaging others that have those kinds of connections and responsibilities is
And inviting them to your events and inviting them to do site visits. I just can't tell you how strongly enough a representative from the governor's office, a representative from the mayor's office, someone from the city council, someone in your elected official. Our NAM members have been going to Capitol Hill for 13 years. We now have members of Congress that go and knock on the back door of their businesses. I mean, and because they're running factories and they have, important national brands, and so it's really, 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 it's a point of leverage that you might not realize you have. Your ability to invite them into your organization, not even formally, but they should know who you are and remember what your role is. Our time is clicking away. You know that my middle name in all of this work is leverage, right? That we use our roles, we use our position to, yes, continue our work forward, but how can we amplify it? It's the logarithm, it's the squared effect. Let's end our portion that we're going to, in maybe 1 minute each. Has this work of the network and the ongoing work of the network and the partnerships and the new relationships that you are building, is it leveraging against those obstacles? The obstacles, we started with obstacles. Are we leveraging against them? Do you see some, is our relentlessly positive approach to all of this going to have that audacious goal that we have?
I think it's helping. It's so early, and again, this is such a long-term process.
It's the long game.
So we are playing the long game. So developing those relationships is so crucial. Are those relationships, are those people turning into champions? I don't know, but they certainly know our message, and they know where to turn when they have a question about something we can help with. And so, again, what you've taught me during the advocacy work in Washington is being a resource to those people. They all have busy lives, they all have needs, and if we can offer to be a resource to help them accomplish what they need to accomplish, then I think we're moving the ball forward.
But you've achieved some major policy wins by being in the plan, and don't underestimate that. That's. You're some in tech. You've got the text language where it needs. Anyone else, Eric or?
Yeah. Well, first I have to give a shout out to Bob Morrison, who really had the name Music for All and got us actively involved in advocacy beyond repeating the outcomes of great research. We did that all the ways, but now to actually have a role in it that matters. Our engagement is the same thing we teach children, and leadership. And best way is to lead by engagement and action, and to do what needs to be done without giving thought to whether you're going to be recognized. You just do it because it needs to be done. What I've learned is the power of engagement and networking and being in groups like this, because of the ideas that come from it, the synergies that come from it, empower myself and our organization to do more. We find that we learn more that we can do that's within our wheelhouse and the storehouse of our resources. And when we just say yes, we also bring the toolkit, the fact that we work with 100,000 students and their families every year, and these are power makers. These are the folks who are running America. They're their children, and that we have a duty to bring that to the table to help extend not just our message, but the entirety of the message to people. So there's hope on the horizon, and at the end of the day, for me, it's just the more kids we put behind music stands or encore risers or just actively making music, the problem will solve itself.
Bravo. Matt?
Go ahead.
Yes, Eric, very inspiring. Both you and Mark. What are your thoughts, Bert?
Yeah, and again, from a slightly different perspective, I think adaptability and awareness is important. I think that while these things are going on and while these challenges will not go away, that your adaptability and awareness that there are subcontexts and that are taking place. The evolution to the suburbs is when we talk about equity. I think there are ways that you can help put a face on what equity is. And cities are struggling with gentrification. Cities are struggling with suburbanization and urbanization. Cities are struggling with the delivery of resources and infrastructure maintenance. Cities are struggling with a maximized tax structure that has little room to flex. And so you're in the context of this. When you're talking to a mayor or a city councilor or a state elected official, your ask is in the context of a mosaic of difficulty. And I would argue that where I think the arts could really be adaptive and resilient, but also help create awareness, is be invited and not afraid to be invited into how can I help solve that? We talk about imagination, creativity, we talk about the resiliency, we talk about the great examples of what it is. Apply it beyond a piece of music. Apply it to the mosaic of community problems and challenges. So I would argue that while yes, and intersect in ways that aren't expected but that demonstrate the potential of unlocking answers, because they are complex problems that elected officials and citizens are struggling with, and your ability to help them to creatively see a 3 degrees right or 7 degrees left and how that might impact a solution, don't miss that opportunity, because that, you know, when a piece of music or a piece of dance or a piece of art moves your soul, that what moves your soul is it's internalized to an experience that is uniquely yours, not just the artist's. And your ability to interpret that for other people and apply that, I think, is critically important to how we build community and sustain success as a society.
Let's thank these wonderful panelists. Thank you. And according to my watch, we have a few minutes for questions? 1 or 2 questions. And our panelists, if they all could stay a little bit later and engage. Are there any questions or comments or thoughts that you've been inspired by from? I saw a lot of head nodding though, which is good. Okay? We'll turn it back to you, Jane. Oh, we had one. There is one. There's a mic.
How closely are you working with the visual arts educators and the dance educators and the theater educators? Because I've seen a trend for music going forward, but not bringing the others along.
Yeah, it's a great question. We, in the network, we invite them, for sure. But I'll be honest with you, it's hard to get them there. It really is. I mean, so what we found is we operate with a wide umbrella. You know, if you're involved in the arts at all, come on and join us. But the ones that are typically responding the most favorably and the most regularly are those in music. So I don't know why.
Maybe it's a perception issue, you know, maybe it's, but I think we've been very, very deliberate that in terms of our NAM members too, not just going out and building music education networks, but being embracing of the whole. So
I think I can locally speak to that. As we in Indianapolis Public Schools engagement, we are part of the Kennedy Center Any Given Child program. So you've heard me talk about music because we're music for all. So that's our mission. But it's one big tent. And that we put, I was on the steering committee that under the Kennedy Center rules that required the CEO's involvement, but all of the arts organizations of Indianapolis rallied around that, plus the mayor's office and the school system, for focus on K through 8. And it was totally about arts integration. I'd say almost to a level of discomfort for me sometimes in terms of the approach being visual arts and other arts, to wondering when would the sequential learning necessarily, particularly for instrumental music, come into the game, and would it carry over to secondary music. But for us, being at the table, and I echo Matt's sense, and when I use the term of just saying yes, and that means to whatever the needs of a community are, using the tools within your understanding to be a part of the community's success, that will get you further than anything else. And for us, being a part of the school system's Kennedy Center initiative, the Any Given Child initiative, empowered us to even have a stronger relationship with the district and its administrators, but to put it in a sense of understanding about what our community is facing, the challenges to our most core urban school program, Indianapolis Public Schools. There is one teacher on assignment responsible for all arts for a district of 28,000 students, which is unheard of, but that's the type of obstacle that we're working with and for and sometimes against.
So I would also say, when we've talked about different states that we're supporting with this effort, also sometimes the music education champions can be trailblazers, right? In other words, because they maybe have a body of research which is deeper and more established, and it just can be but it's not excluding, and I think the field has had that tendency to say, well, how are we How are we sort of bifurcated? But again, our arts education partnership, this precious network, I think is really, it reminds us that we are really moving forward together. We want that opportunity, all of those opportunities to be part for every child.
Mary, and I would just add to that, that I think from an outsider's perspective that when you looked at the Arts Education Partnership and the process of bringing everybody together, there was a period of trust building and that was probably required to, as people said, I'll be a part of something else. I think my observation, and you can say, Matt, you're totally off base, and you can speak to me afterwards to correct me, is that if you compare two different environments, sports and the arts, what makes arts so powerful is its creativity and its individuality. What also makes it also challenging is that individuality makes it more difficult to align. And I don't mean that as a criticism, I just mean that as an observation. Sports, the dominant sport in college is football, where the revenue is, and basketball. But if you take a look at the Indiana High School Sports Federation, the IHSAA, 20 years ago there was no lacrosse, there was no soccer, and those have become dominant sports. And so an art activity, or in this case a sport activity, has come from nothing to most significant, but the umbrella over the entity has become stronger because the alliance aligns. And I think that what I would suggest is that the ability to get the alliance to align and strengthen is more challenging for the arts than it is for sports because of the creative individual abilities of people. And I think that to overcome that will be critical to have that kind of strength. I think there are those differences and you have to work and talk through those safely.
And I think we aspire to that.
Absolutely.
We really do. Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our great panelists. Thank you.